Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Crypto is basically just an attempt, a complicated technological attempt to make that possible outside the remit of the Borg. And the hostility with which people talk about it, James was pointing out that they kind of like roll out every possible accusation against stuff they don't like. It's bad for the environment because you use all the electricity. It's bad, it's forgery. It shuts down the financial markets. All these terrible problems. Meanwhile, of course, they're wreaking havoc on the financial markets. And I do think that the idea would then be that if they can provide their own crypto, it's like that meme where you say, "Mom, can we have Fruit Loops?" And mom says, "We have Fruit Loops at home," and you go home and it's like some knockoff brand or something. That's sort of what this is. It's like, "Mom, can we have cryptocurrency?" Well, we have cryptocurrency at home. It's the Fed. It's this Fed-controlled central dollar. And then, you won't be able to pay your taxes and anything else. You won't be able to do. Gradually, they chip away at the things that you can do with other kinds of currency. Hello, and welcome back to The Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast from the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Klavan, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined this week by editor of the American Mind, James Poulos, managing editor, Seth Barron, and president and publisher, Ryan Williams. We've got a full docket today, lots to talk about, and we're going to start by coming at the Ukraine thing from a slightly different angle than perhaps in the past. The latest news on this, of course, that everybody's talking about is that Biden has blocked Russian oil imports with obvious consequences, including skyrocketing oil prices at home and also abroad. The sort of war by sanction continues to wage on. And naturally, people have some questions. Even people that generally are critical of Putin or support Ukraine or want America to be involved are going to feel the hurt of this at the pump. We already are. I live next door to a gas station, 2 gas stations, in fact, and I watch them in a kind of mutually assured destruction war of escalation every morning as they hike up the price another 20 cents. In Tennessee, we've now reached the gas price that LA was at under Trump, which will tell you something because we typically have much lower prices, of course. And in LA, I don't even want to think about what it's like, although I'm sure some of my colleagues will update me as we go.
In certain parts, it's over $7 for premium.
Holy crow. That's, I shut this podcast. That's it. That's the end of the episode. I can't bear anymore. Actually, what we wanted to talk about is the way that Democrat politicians and celebrities are responding to people's concerns about this, about hurting at the pump, about the general policy of sanctions and so forth. There's an emerging kind of line coming into view that was sort of first premiered, I think, by Pete Buttigieg, transportation secretary, former Mayor Pete, who says, well, if you have problems with rising gas prices, that's a great reason for you to get an electric car. Just take all that money that you don't have to spend at the pump and spend it on buying a Tesla. He says everyone can benefit from, quote, rural to suburban to urban communities can all benefit from the gas savings of driving an EV. And this let them eat Teslas kind of approach to the whole situation seems to be just kind of what they're going with. Kamala Harris has endorsed this idea. And behind that, underneath that, is a kind of deeper sense that, well, you shouldn't be paying for gas at all because it's not very virtuous, is it, to be using so much gas, driving with your gas-guzzling tank and trying to just destroy the environment with your big family and living out in the country and driving so far. The particularly tone-deaf version of this comes from folks like George Takei, he of former Star Trek fame, and how far indeed he's fallen since he was on Star Trek. He writes, tweets, "Americans, we can endure higher prices for food and gas if it means putting the screws to Putin. Consider it a patriotic donation in the fight to freedom over tyranny." And we got another one from Stephen Colbert, host of The Late Show on CBS. He says that, it stings, but I'd pay $15 a gallon for gas if it meant, having a clean conscience. And this means not just having a clean conscience on the Russia-Ukraine thing, but also, about the way that we are handling our energy policies, I suppose, more generally. And so it seems like this is kind of the moment for the Green New Dealers to strike. This is what they've been waiting for all along, is some way to make American energy prices, oil prices, prohibitive, so they can sail in and say, see, of course, what we need is to pilot our entire fleet of planes, trains, and automobiles using small gnomes who generate power by pedaling an electric bicycle or something like that. I joke, but this really is, it's kind of astonishing that people who make gajillions of dollars a year are sort of just laughing in the face of the peasants that feel concerned about paying $10 a gallon for gas or whatever we worry it may become. And so the first question I think for the panel is, are these people really that out of touch and stupid, or are they actually evil? Is there something behind this?
Well, I think that there is a certain kind of stupidity behind it. And there is this faith. Mark Mills writes for the New Atlantis. He writes a lot, he writes a lot about, he's a conservative science writer. But he made this great point once that, okay, the information revolution showed that we can compress the amount of, digital data can be compressed to tiny amounts. So you can have an enormous amount of information contained in, you can carry it around in your pocket. I mean, we all know this. This is famous. And he says that people want to translate that dynamic from the digital world to, from the world of information technology to the physical world. So this idea that, well, why can't energy just be, digitized in that sense, so that you could, instead of needing a 55-gallon drum of oil, you could contain the same amount of energy in just a tiny little, whatever. And so there's this misunderstanding, but it doesn't work that way. Battery technology, I think in order to store the amount of energy that's in a 55-gallon drum of oil in batteries, you would need some massive, incredibly expensive array of batteries. I don't remember exactly what the scale is. So I think on one level there is this misunderstanding of how solar and wind work in terms of creating electricity. And then also just the idea that electric cars are somehow separate from the carbon-based economy. I'm sure for Stephen Colbert or George Takei, as far as they're concerned, it's kind of like when people wish cycle, right? Well, I just have all this trash that I came up with, but I'm going to throw it all in the recycling bin and sort of assume that it'll all be recycled. So I don't have any guilt about all my consumption. Or, I'm sure Bill Gates tells himself, well, yes, of course, or John Kerry, of course I fly my private jet around, but that's all balanced out by my virtuous, carbon offsets. So similarly, someone who drives a Tesla says, well, okay, well, it's not my fault that the grid is so primitive that it uses coal to generate the electricity that I'm using. If I had my way, it would all be wind and solar. So I think there's a lot of really bad faith at work.
Yeah, and sort of the old libertarian trope. Was it Friedman originally? I think there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's overused, but it seems manifest in this discussion. Seth, just a few more data points. Our friend Steve Hayward has often pointed out that, and you mentioned it somewhat, this energy, the energy to power electric vehicles has to come from somewhere. A lot of zinc is needed to make the sophisticated batteries that electric cars run on. Lithium as well. Zinc, by the way, is one of the more sort of economically destructive mining operations known to man, if not the most. Lithium prices have tripled, commodity prices have tripled over the last 6 months, with a very steep climb over the last 10 days or so. So yeah, it's just this mythical thinking that somehow market forces will cease to operate in global commodities trading. And, if you cut off oil, somehow you're going to find yourself much more quickly, because saying it makes it so, starting with at least the Obama administration, you'll find yourself somehow miraculously in carbon neutral, fully electric land by by the 2050s. And we should really be grateful for this wake up call on evil Russian oil and just lean into it, and everything will be fine. It's just not to say nothing of, energy prices, whatever you want to say about renewables, they can't meet the demand. They're not scalable right now. So you need to rely on petroleum. And you're not going to power immediately anytime soon all of your trucking and transportation with electric. So it's just going to drive price inflation in all sorts of consumables across the board, everything that needs to ride on a truck, at least. It's really, I just think they're fiddling while Rome burns on this question. And it's really just going to get worse. I will predict here on the American Mind that it's very likely in a couple of states we'll see $10 a gallon gas by June or July. And it's just another variable in what are going to be it's going to be a very turbulent midterm election, to say the least, with I think consequences for Democrats that they are just starting to realize. But this whole Ukraine business and their mishandling of it, and I should lump plenty of establishment Republicans in with them. It's not just Democrats. It's going to be a wild few months.
Yes, things are going to continue to get more difficult, and it's all interlocking. The regime has made the determination on some level that the American people are not competent to participate in their form of government as they understand it and as it is written down, and that therefore they should just not be told what is really going on. For instance, foreign shipments of fertilizer are drying up, being suspended, going away. There's been a consistent struggle over rare earth metal production for a number of years. A lot of this stuff comes out of China. The U.S. is trying to get, independent on that side of things. But at the same time, the Biden administration is now basically destroying the petrodollar. Among the countries that support Russia right now, in addition to the Indians, are basically all of our Arab allies, to the point where, in the Gulf, they are not returning Biden's phone calls when it comes to the price of oil. And so if the dollar is becoming decoupled from the cost of a barrel of oil, then the obvious question is what it's pegged to and what its actual value is, and what is the basis of its use as a storehouse of value and the backbone of international finance. And, I don't think it's a surprise that at the same time, there's this push, which we just discussed, for, good news. There's an electric car with your name on it. Actually, no, it's hard to get your hands on a Tesla. And because of this, Teslas are becoming premium cars to rent, and people are using, apps to rent. A Tesla that they bought a couple of years ago, they can now rent this thing out and make bank. And at the same time that all this is going on, the administration is rushing something that we're going to talk about a little later, I hope, which is a digital dollar, basically. So, what we're seeing here is the energy front of this world war over who controls technology and in what ways. And we've got inflation that's now projected to head to 8 or 9% minimum. All of this has to do with what the dollar really is. And I think the race is on to transform the dollar into a type of information that can be used directly for the control of society as a whole and of individuals.
There's this really interesting kind of rhetorical flip, and I say interesting in a grim kind of way, that goes along with what you're saying, James, because I completely agree. I think they have simply decided that the way Americans wish to live is morally unacceptable, and therefore whatever they can do while paying some lip service to the American regime or Constitution or whatever they can do to remold and reform and reshape the people whom they find wanting, they will do. They will reshape us according to their ethical vision if it kills them and us. And there's a really fascinating way that this gets justified. And you see it in the energy stuff, and you see it with the COVID thing, too. There's a version of it in COVID where, isn't it great that President Biden has opened everything up, that there are so many jobs people have gotten under President Biden. And of course, you know, no Democrat should get any credit for any of this because they caused all of the problems in the first place, right? If you lock people down, if you take away their right to assemble, their right to have a job, their right to, you know, pursue their business rather in an effective and free way, then you do not get credit for then benevolently giving them their job back. And this is an even more perverse version of it, the energy stuff, where it's like, well, this catastrophe has occurred, and that just shows the need for our policies. You weren't convinced of our arguments that you needed to drive electric vehicles. You weren't convinced of our arguments that you needed to have a smaller family. You weren't convinced of our arguments that you needed to live in hyperdense cities, right? All of these things seemed unnatural and unappealing to you, and so you didn't listen to us, and now look what's happened. Now Ukraine is being invaded by Russia, and you are surely now you will see. I mean, this amounts effectively to policymaking at gunpoint and under duress, right? It's a kind of blackmail that you sort of wait for some crisis to occur, and then, you know, indeed do many things to cause the crisis to occur. And then you say that the crisis is proof that your bad ideas are really the only way. Unfortunately, it's a shame. It's the only way out. I mean, there ought to be a rule of thumb that if somebody is selling you a policy on the basis only of a disaster, and in that, for that matter, a disaster that they caused, right, that whole argument is illegitimate. But that's basically the entire premise here, is that, you know, because things have gotten so bad under Democrat policies, what we really need is the Democrat policies that nobody would agree on except in these moments of panic and manufactured crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think like what James said about that's Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are not returning, they're not even talking to Biden about pumping more gas. It's like, this is another self-own or own goal or whatever, because I mean, I think that one of the main reasons they're angry is because Biden is pushing so hard to get Iran's nuclear deal back. You know, I mean, the craziest thing that's going on is in the midst of this whole war and this isolation of Russia. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I gather is that Russia is our bargaining agent at the table with Iran. Like, we have given like Russia our proxy vote, essentially, to negotiate how Iran gets back its nuclear capabilities, and, you know, all the money that we've whatever supposedly taken. And like, they just desanctioned a bunch of Iranian terrorist types the other day. It's like, this is so important to the Obama worldview, the Obama Valerie Jarrett worldview, that Iran be a nuclear superstate, that can't get in the way. So, I mean, I'm just saying that this is another way in which the current regime, like the well-being of Americans is so far down the list of what matters that, you know, they've even screwed up the possibility of having leverage with Saudi Arabia. You know, one other thing, and this might be really minor, but I saw somewhere somebody saying, oh, we should get Tesla, tell Elon Musk to disable all of the Teslas in Russia. Because that's the thing, Teslas, now I don't know if this goes for all electric cars, but Teslas are all wired to the grid. I mean, wired to the internet. Like, they're all smart vehicles. So, you know, you can download the latest, you know, engine upgrade or whatever. But it's interesting to think that, oh, well, there's another good reason to have electric vehicles, because then there's like a centralized control, and somebody can turn them all off, or just turn off yours if they decide to. I don't know if that's actually a universal thing for electric cars, but it seems kind of, I mean, at least a internal combustion engine, you can just, you know, run yourself, and you don't have to be connected to the internet to use it.
This is crucial, and it's a great segue into our next topic, actually. Absolutely, centralized forms of control, pretenses for centralized forms of control is part of the name of the game here. And I've been thinking for a while, and I'm not alone, that a lot of the sort of so-called soft power attacks that the administration is currently making against Russia, in addition to being foreign policy maneuvers, are also test driving things that they might do here to us, to Americans, and specifically to Americans who don't comply. So yeah, get you in a car that they can turn off at will rather than letting you be mobile, make you so poor that you have to rent the car from them, so on and so forth. I mean, the inevitable slippage here, I think, is, well, Putin is just like Hitler, and Hitler and the Nazis are so bad that they're just like Republicans who are also like Nazis and Hitler. And so we got to do the same things that we did to Putin to the Republicans because they're like Hitler and they're the Nazis. And one major way that they could exert this kind of control is with this centralized, basically Fed crypto Fed, which we have now on, I'm reading from Politico. Biden is ordering a sweeping review, the first sweeping review, I believe, ever of federal policy on cryptocurrency. This includes the possible launch of a federally issued digital dollar. So we've been running some pieces on the site already about this, and under features, we've got a cryptocurrency feature that talks about this idea of a centralized cryptocurrency as basically the opposite of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, the point of Bitcoin being that there is no Fed, right? That the Fed can't just print more money and inflate the dollar and so forth. Here, the idea would be that we all have to get on the federally approved blockchain as soon as possible. Reading through the White House's press release about this, it says basically what you would expect. There's a lot of boilerplate. The rise in digital assets creates an opportunity to reinforce American leadership in the global financial system and the technological frontier. All of this glittering rhetoric hiding exactly the possibility that Seth is talking about, but at a catastrophic national and financial scale, right? It's basically the possibility of thwarting cryptocurrency before it ever becomes a really viable alternative to the dollar.
It's a big problem. I mean, we've seen the financial system basically destroyed in 2008, and it's never been the same. Tons of dirty money flowed into the West and propped it up, not just into the coffers of things like the Foundation, but into sovereign wealth. And we've never really recovered from that. And it's always been a question of sort of like which quote unquote permanent arrangement is going to rise up out of the ashes of 2008 and all that came after. We've heard for years from Wall Street types, leading bankers, globalists, and NGO folks that cash is bad. Cash is what criminals use. It's untraceable. It's bad for the. I mean, they throw every one of their boilerplate criticisms in the book at cash. They call out North Korea as an example. Oh, they're getting better and better at counterfeiting. We need to stop this. It's a national security issue. We need to get off cash. We saw during COVID, mysteriously, there's a nationwide coin shortage. Is there really? So we've been moving in this direction for a while, and now that we've got the rise of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, we got the administration blowing up the petrodollar, and then we've got the return of food shortages and supply chain issues. So I think all this is a piece of this central bank digital currency, as it's called, is why they're flooring the gas pedal on this. And I'm told that my internet connection is a little unstable here, so maybe they're listening in right now. I'd better shut up and let you guys take over.
It's in a way, it's interesting. It's kind of a return to crypto's roots, or at least the accusation that early days of crypto, it was used on the Silk Road and to buy drugs and stuff back when it was basically worthless. I mean, not basically, but you could get 20 Bitcoins and buy drugs with them. From international internet purveyors. But now it's gotten much, much bigger, and it's one way to, especially if you're familiar with these terms. If you're not, you can just look them up. But if you don't have a, as they say, know your KYC, know your customer platform for crypto, that is, if you hold it in a cold wallet, et cetera, rather than through an intermediary, it becomes virtually impossible for the government to track it and seize it. And this played a role in the Canadian trucker stuff, as I think we mentioned. And it's coming to a theater near us because Spencer mentioned earlier that many of us are concerned about the way that the Ukraine crisis is going and the kind of moral panic about Russia stuff, with all of these corporations suspending business in Russia, basically punishing normal Russians for what the government is up to, something we really didn't do much even in the Cold War, at the height of the Cold War, that is punish Russians. As Mike Anton pointed out on a recent podcast, maybe on Steve Hayward's podcast, maybe on the one he did with us, interviewing Charles Haywood, NSC 68 differentiated between the Russian people and the Russian regime. Now, Putin's no USSR. The analogy's not that great, but we're entering this new, interesting, outsourced global or outsourced national policy, outsourced to corporations. Visa has pulled out of Russia. Many of us worry that this is a dry run, as Spencer mentioned, for stuff that might be deployed against folks in America. And it's not a fever dream or conspiracy theory, because as our friend Kyle Scheidler has pointed out on The American Mind, I think the piece is called "The Enemy Is You" in a feature. The centerpiece of Biden's national security document on domestic security is the problem of domestic extremism, which, they sort of say, oh, don't worry, that's just crazy white nationalists. Most Americans don't have to worry. But if you look at their kind of supporting documents and the definitions of who is a domestic extremist, it runs all the way down to, people who hold anti-government sentiment. So you pull all this together and see crypto as a way of exiting part of this control mechanism of corporate governance, quasi-governmental policy pursued through corporate agreements and mob pressure and kind of wink and nod regulators getting the likes of Visa to do their dirty work. And, the stakes for crypto, and especially loosely regulated and fairly independent and kind of liberty-minded crypto, the original distributed ledger system with a lot of anonymity, has to be a real target for governments across the West, because they're increasingly, as another theme of ours, they're increasingly taking one side in what is kind of a spiritual war about what human nature is and what technology is and what justice is. And the West is deeply divided on that question. And so the crypto fight has to be viewed in light of all of that. And I think all patriotic and responsible and knowledgeable citizens need to bone up quickly on this issue, if they haven't already, and start taking some direct action to influence things for the better, as well as, those who can, doing what they can to sort of inform the public about this, like we hope we're doing.
I'm not very literate on crypto, so maybe somebody could explain, like, say the U.S. set up its own digital dollar, like along the lines of what what James and Ryan just sketched out. How would that make Bitcoin, for instance? How would that sideline Bitcoin? Because doesn't it just exist by itself? I mean, why would the digital dollar supersede Bitcoin, unless they figure out a way to just totally destroy Bitcoin and, remove the blockchain from the internet, or however they would do it? Why would it matter to Bitcoin if they start a digital dollar?
Well, because you'll be required to use it. It'll become the mandatory currency, and it'll be the condition of your participation in the financial system.
Fair enough.
And people who resist, will be punished. I mean, they'll get turned off, as they have been. We see how this works from China to Canada and everywhere in between, and it's being prepped now for us.
Yeah, the crypto bulls say that Bitcoin at this point is too big to cancel, Seth. So I don't know if I buy that. I mean, my view on this has always been, and look, I'm a dilettante on the actual technology. I know just enough to get myself into trouble. We defer to some of our more knowledgeable folks on both sides of this issue as we continue to write about it. But my view has always been, if you had, just look at the history of currencies of whatever kind. Granted, the distributed ledger is a little bit of a different technology and maybe harder to cancel. And there's this, you run into the oligopoly problem where, it's the old OPEC problem, right? Even if you had China, the US, and Western Europe gang up to try to kill blockchain or various cryptocurrencies, the incentive to cheat from all manner of countries, big and small, is so huge that you would have maybe the de minimis case for crypto in a squeezed crypto world with the encroaching universal and homogenous state in the form of some international organizations trying to kill it. Maybe at the most you could reduce it to some islands of crypto havens, in Latin America or wherever. I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch all of this, but James is right, and I think the tenor of my comments are correct. Of course, I wouldn't have said them if I didn't think so. I mean, the governments are going to start moving much, much more aggressively on this, especially in the West. And not just the West. I mean, China has moved aggressively to seize its own and bolster its own sort of versions of state-controlled crypto. But it's fascinating, and the technology is very interesting. Blockchain technology is very interesting, aside completely from the currency potentials. And yeah, it's the same old story. Anything that in the last 50 years that across the West that liberty-loving individuals can use to secure a certain amount of autonomy completely outside or mostly outside the eye of the state, has to be vilified by hook or crook and sort of quashed. The coming battles will be interesting and fateful.
Yeah, I mean, my usual MO in this, since I too am really not an expert in the technology by any stretch of the imagination, but my usual sort of plotting MO is just to try and kind of pull back and describe what's happening in like simple sort of plain terms. And the kind of like dumb person version of this, it seems to me, if you boil it down, is that crypto amounts to people trying to find a way to use new technology to trade with one another and to assign value to things that they agree upon and to enter into mutual contractual agreements with each other without the intervention of a kind of incompetent, all-seeing and rather hostile state, which for all the reasons we've been talking about are, we seem to have a state that treats certain people at home, certain political dissidents at home, the same as it treats enemies abroad. And so when people try to kind of find an out from that and just kind of get back to doing transactions the way it's supposed to be one of our natural rights to have ownership over property and to interact, to exchange that property in terms that we see fit and make contracts and all that. And crypto is basically just a complicated technological attempt to make that possible outside the remit of the Borg. And the hostility with which people talk about it, James was pointing out that they kind of like roll out every possible accusation against stuff they don't like. It's bad for the environment because you use all the electricity. It's bad, it's forgery. It shuts down the financial markets. All these terrible problems. Meanwhile, of course, they're wreaking havoc on the financial markets. And I do think that the idea would then be that if they can provide their own crypto, it's like that meme where you say, "Mom, can we have Fruit Loops?" And mom says, "We have Fruit Loops at home." And you go home and it's like some knockoff brand or something. That's sort of what this is. It's like, "Mom, can we have cryptocurrency?" Well, we have cryptocurrency at home. It's the Fed. It's this Fed-controlled central dollar. And then, yeah, you won't be able to pay your taxes and anything else. You won't be able to do. So gradually, they chip away at the things that you can do with other kinds of currency and shut things like Bitcoin out of the market. So it'll still exist and be durable, but only in the kind of way that cockroaches are durable in a nuclear apocalypse. Like once everything collapses, the stuff that they've shut out will still be there. And in that sense, maybe it's still a good investment. Well, we have another sort of round of gender madness to talk about before we finish up today. And that is this weird crystallizing, maybe it's not weird, but we've talked about this before, the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida. We kind of discussed it when it was first getting going and when the rhetoric around it was first starting to take shape. But we thought it was worth revisiting the bill, both because it has passed in Florida, this bill, which in point of fact is not a "Don't Say Gay" bill, but rather a parents' rights bill, attempting in Florida to give parents control over what sort of sexually explicit content and indeed sort of grooming adjacent activities take place in public schools. The sort of offending clause of this law is number 3, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. You read it out that way, of course, it's literally impossible to object to that unless you're a pervert that wants to groom kids, right? You should not be talking to kids in kindergarten through grade 3 about anything other than like how to pronounce the letter B. But leaving that aside, of course, the reaction to this has been to completely ignore the kindergarten through grade 3 limitation, to, talk about this as if Ron DeSantis wants to outlaw saying the word gay or talking about homosexuals at all, and put everybody in the stocks for even discussing homosexuality or transgenderism. There have been just really cringy demonstrations of legislators, grown adults, unfortunately, walking through the halls of legislation, just saying the word gay over and over again, as if this will soon be illegal in Florida. And it comes now, it is of a piece with a number of kind of parents' rights movements that are taking place. Governor Greg Abbott in Texas has given an instruction to treat, I'm reading here from this letter here, to treat a number of so-called sex change procedures as constituting child abuse under Texas law. And it's really just confirming something that the Attorney General has said about things like puberty blockers and transgender surgery for minors. All of these things, stuff which they're really, hard as we might try to see it, there really is no reasonable compromise on whether or not you can like block a child's pubertal development or render them infertile or castrate them in the name of some supposed future transition. And so this too is being regarded as like an unremitting attack. This Slate magazine called it the GOP's all-out war on trans people. The lie always being that if you do this, of course, kids will go and kill themselves, as if there's no line between like not letting kids castrate themselves and not giving kids any care at all or paying any attention to them. It comes at the same time as in Scotland, there is a move to now make it legal to just self-define your gender. J.K. Rowling got caught up in this. And it seems to be kind of shaping up into one of these new culture war fronts, that there's a kind of party of parents of varying, degrees of political conservatism, some of them not conservatives at all. But, in Idaho, too, this was the case, and previously in Loudoun County in Virginia, just folks kind of getting together and saying, look, we simply do not want the state to be able to take our children away and sexually indoctrinate them and groom them. Meanwhile, Chris Rufo, a former alumnus of our fellowships and famous exposer of CRT, has unearthed a kind of sex ed camp where kids are being taken away by, it must be said, rather rotund women to be taught about all the different sex positions that they can take. Anyway, I'm going on and on because the point here is that the examples proliferate, and this is becoming a trend now that people are starting to realize what's going on, the radicalism that's going on in schools. They're gathering together, they're standing up against that, and the response seems to be like to just lie, to just create an entire fantasy world in which the people that don't want their children groomed at age in kindergarten are the people that want to like see trans kids dying in the streets. So I hand it over to you guys to say, is that simply the end game here? Is it just going to be sort of lying and seeing if that works? And will it work?
Well, the lying is really the key thing, I think. Like, for instance, with the hormone the puberty blockers. I mean, puberty blockers are extremely high doses of sex hormones, or something that blocks the pituitary gland, basically. And what they always say with it, I went through like 10 or 12 different articles about it, and they all say reversible puberty. Like, these are reversible. It's non-permanent. It's just reversible. Now, I mean, if there's really a way to stop biological development and then just temporally and then just resume it, well, I'd like to get on board, because I'd prefer not to get any older than I am now or suffer the effects of gravity more than I have to. It's just a lie. These things are not reversible. Like, as you said, they cause sterility. They cause all kinds of problems. Human beings, it's like if you deprive a baby of listening to human voices and raise it as some kind of feral, in feral conditions, it will not then thrive the minute you start giving it language. There's all kinds of ways in which, if you interrupt development, humans are not, it's not like a machine. You can just pause it and then start it up again. And just this point alone, it is so pernicious. And the idea that you could take a 10-year-old, pause their development, and then resume it, and everything will be fine. It's such a repulsive lie. I mean, to me, Greg Abbott is this is practically heroic that they're doing this. That they are saying that teachers are now mandated reporters, and this is abuse, and anyone doing it must be reported to Child Protective Services. I mean, I think in the future this will be seen as like a great thing. But, as far as what their ends are, I think it's the same ends that they have with everything else, which is just to paint their opponents as Christo-fascists, lunatics, and ultimately, to turn every human being, every young human being into a, to convince everybody that they're not part of a species, but that they're like some sort of unique self-formed composite, and, essentially destroy the family and civilization that way.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's this postmodern notion that identity completely unhooked from any notion of anthropology, biological fact, or nature as a standard is the sort of end all and be all of liberation and freedom. This has philosophical roots going back to at least Rousseau, which we don't have to get into now, but the roots run deep, but it's taken a while to spin out into this current iteration. The good news I'll backtrack and just say, we need to understand the left's rhetoric on this. Spencer mentioned it. It's obfuscatory and dishonest, to say the least. Trans care is how they're pitching their objection at the sort of low end of the rhetorical scale to the Idaho bill, to the Texas bill, to the Florida bill. At the high end of the rhetorical spectrum, they're saying, this is Republicans enacting a genocide, or the prerequisites for genocide of trans people before our very eyes. The Idaho law in particular, which was harsh, it makes a felony anyone fleeing with a child to give them this kind of quote unquote care out of state. I think I got that right. And they're going to try to use the old playbook from, what Mike Pence in Indiana, remember, with the Defense of the Religious Freedom Act, sort of state level act, in which they tried to protect the freedom of conscience of certain businesses who say didn't want to make gay wedding cakes or that kind of thing. And the full weight of it, a similar thing happened in North Carolina too, subsequently. The full weight of corporate boycotting came down on these states, and they caved. I think North Carolina, it was transgender bathrooms. So more recent than the Indiana example. And you're seeing this already today. I don't remember if you mentioned this in your intro. Sorry if you did, Spencer. But Disney is meeting with Governor DeSantis to try to chastise, and is going to oppose such legislation. Disney being, one of the very large corporate footprints in Florida, with Disney World, obviously, and other things. So this is the fight. The good news for the right is that it's rare that you get such a nice alignment of good politics and good policy. This is a very popular issue that is running against cultural cultural Marxist identity politics madness. We mentioned this maybe a month ago. The DCCC is warning Democrat politicians that this kind of thing polls terribly. Critical race theory, the transgender stuff as well. So I think the solution to this is to go through it. The way is through, as it were. I think these state legislatures should all push the pedal to the metal and force the other side to get more and more hysterical, unhinged, and extreme, and use that political opportunity to just raise this to a national issue and make everyone in the country who is at all mildly interested in politics to just really get spun up about this and to oppose it. This needs to be killed. It's also the last point. It's also, we've talked about this before. it's big business too. I mean, there are a lot of people making a lot of dishonest people. I'm sure some of them are well-meaning and are fully caught up in this, but a lot of opportunists in the psychiatric community. You open a transgender clinic and you can have a booming business, especially in liberal suburbs and metropolises. And you see it out here in Los Angeles. You see it in New York. The business is going great for a lot of these psychiatrists and psychologists. And then, as Seth didn't mention it explicitly, but it of course goes without saying, Big Pharma's found another revenue stream, which is this growing desire for all of these hormone medications to administer to children. So the whole thing is just sick. I think the ways in which we can rhetorically do battle against sort of trans activists and the useful idiots that are pulled in their train on the left, who have been disarmed for the last few decades with any objection to kind of the latest iteration of mad anti-anthropology, anti-biological sex, anti-reason, and anti-nature evolutions on the left. So yeah, I'm actually heartened by the whole thing. I think we're kind of, the states are just waking up, and parent groups, whether it's CRT or trans stuff, are going to really find their own and become a major bulwark of the populist right-ish wing movement in America, or even center-right movement in America. And I think it's a good development.
Here. It's all well said, and I co-sign it. I mean, we're winning this fight, I think, is what Ryan, you were saying just now, and it's true, we are. And when people come out to defend things like puberty blockers, they really do reveal themselves to be lying SOBs. It's kind of disgusting, and as Seth says, the whole sort of architecture of euphemism that exists to disguise this from the public is incredibly elaborate and complex, right? I mean, reversible puberty blockers to begin with, right? Not only is it impossible to imagine that could be the case biologically, that you could go through that without suffering problems, and in fact, of course, they cause all sorts of problems, including sterility, but also just like, what does reversible mean in this case? It would literally mean turning back time, because of course going through puberty is part of the development that kids need in order to understand themselves and their bodies and all this stuff. And so it's truly vile and loathsome, sort of what this movement does and has already done to many children's bodies. You can read Abigail Shrier at length on this topic. You can read Brian T. Anderson, or even maybe more importantly, you can follow the detransitioners who have been coming out of the woodwork more and more. And this is another thing, they get shamed, they get silenced. But, you talk to or you read rather the words of Kyra Bell, for example, in the UK, where a lot of this has been going on. And there's going to be a serious reckoning over, you don't talk about the wrong side of history. There is going to be just a catastrophic reckoning with what's been done to children's bodies, especially young girls. Our friend Inez Stepman was tweeting an account that somebody had portrayed what it means to have gender dysphoria as a young girl. And it's basically just like, I don't like the sound of my voice on recordings. I don't like the way I look in dresses, pathologizing all of the insecurities and just natural developments that come along with being a girl. It truly does amount effectively to pathologizing young womanhood, which is something Shrier is great on. So all of this, in retrospect, will be looked back on as moral courage to have stood up against this, and crazy that more people didn't immediately react to it as the nightmare that it is. But the one thing is, we can't back down, right? I mean, this campaign exists. This whole Don't Say Gay campaign exists for one sole purpose, and that is to make conservatives, not liberals who already agree with all this madness, but to make conservatives cowed and say, oh, well, maybe, in some cases, perhaps this is not the time for that. The whole point of this assault is to make conservatives afraid to say what they really mean, which is that it is child abuse to do anything involving gender transition to a child in a medical way. And if we hold the line on this, I think we will definitely win.
I just want to throw one little idea in, which is that I think what might really kill it dead is when the trial lawyers get involved, because if enough people who were maimed and mutilated by doctors really excited to see what happens if you operate on a 4-year-old's genitals, if they start getting into the the sight lines of plaintiff attorneys, and there's like major malpractice lawsuits about this, I think then it would really kill it.
It's a good parallel strategy. I like it. That's actually more generally something the right should do more of. We've been generally sort of anti-ambulance chasers for plenty of good reasons, but it's one way of fighting back is to do a lot of opportunistic and pro-conservative, for lack of a better term, class action lawsuits. And the added bonus is that the incentive structure is very nice for intelligent and enterprising right-leaning attorneys, or even just enterprising, sort of mercenary attorneys. There's a lot of money to be made for the attorneys involved. So it's something that you can do outside of a big part of the kind of public advocacy work on the right, which happens a lot not through the profit motive, but through a nonprofit. So it's another avenue to pursue. And I suspect that it's being looked into. I should hope so.
Well, it's also another area in which Democrats, if they're thinking clearly, should be extremely worried about the midterms. At least one can hope. We'll probably see them as this stuff becomes more and more toxic. We may see them walk back off of it. But as Ryan was pointing out, it just pulls so abysmally when people actually know what's being proposed here. And I liked Seth's suggestion that another great rhetorical response is, wait, so why are you so interested in talking to the third graders about their genitals? Like, what's exactly the the urgency there? And yeah, I mean, there's really, reading back again that Florida bill, I was actually impressed with how well written it is. There's not a shred of animus in it, and it doesn't actually even say anything about like the rightness or wrongness of any kind of lifestyle, including lifestyles that I think we would all deplore. It just says you shouldn't be you have to hand your kids over in order to teach them their multiplication tables. You shouldn't have to also hand them over to groomers and Mengele style experimental doctors. Well, it's getting more and more gruesome the more we talk about this, so we might as well shut the podcast down. It's been a pleasure as always. Thanks, guys, and nice to end on something that we actually have hope that we can win on. As always, it's great to talk to you all. Thanks for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, visit claremont.org/donate. And if you want to learn more about all our projects and writing, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our no longer quite brand new Washington, D.C. based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Last week, Ryan, after we signed off, told me that I could stop calling the D.C. Center brand new because it's been around for more than a year. So sorry, guys, you are no longer the new kids on the block. You're expected to pull your weight, as of course they've been doing the entire time. Please rate, share, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts. That's very important to help us get this word out. And wherever you get your podcasts, you can rate and share us. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon, Annalisa Lee, and Noah Peterson. And thank you all for listening. Talk to you next week.